The thing about legends is that we only remember the moments they wanted us to see. The magazine covers, the film premieres, the carefully choreographed demonstrations before audiences who already believed. But I'm 73 years old now, and what keeps me awake at night isn't the spectacle. It's what happened in the marble lobby of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Hong Kong on the evening of March 17, 1972, when a team of 6 professional bodyguards made the mistake of assuming they knew exactly who Bruce Lee was. I was there. I saw everything, and for 52 years, I've carried the weight of that night like a stone in my chest, because what unfolded in those 11 minutes changed not just how I understood combat, but how I understood what it means to be truly powerful in a world that confuses violence with strength. This isn't a story about a fight. This is a story about the moment when restraint became the most devastating weapon anyone in that room had ever witnessed. By March of 1972, Bruce Lee had already become something more than human in the public imagination. The big boss had shattered box office records across Asia just 4 months earlier. Fist of Fury would premiere in Hong Kong theaters in precisely 3 weeks. Magazine covers from Tokyo to Bangkok featured his face, that intensity in his eyes that made you feel like he could see straight through whatever mask you were wearing. He was 31 years old, stood 5 feet 7.5 inches tall, weighed 135 pounds, and could generate more explosive force per square inch of contact than men twice his size. But numbers don't capture what made Bruce Lee dangerous. What made him dangerous was that he had spent the previous 9 years systematically dismantling every assumption the martial arts world held sacred, and in the process, he had made enemies. Not the kind who challenged you openly, the kind who smiled at premieres and whispered in expensive hotel bars about how movie fighting wasn't real fighting, how dancers and actors were pretenders to traditions they didn't understand, how eventually someone would need to teach this upstart a lesson about respect. The Mandarin Oriental Hotel in 1972 was where power congregated. 15 stories of glass and marble overlooking Victoria Harbor, where diplomats and film executives and industrialists paid 200 Hong Kong dollars per night for rooms designed to make you feel like royalty. The lobby featured 40-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors that clicked under leather shoes with a sound like distant gunshots, and crystal chandeliers that cast fractured light across surfaces polished to mirrors. Bruce arrived at 8:47 p.m. that evening for a meeting with Raymond Chow, his producer at Golden Harvest. He wore a dark blue blazer over a simple black shirt, tan slacks, and leather shoes that had been resold twice because he refused to waste money on expensive footwear. His hair was slightly longer than in the films, touched with pomade that caught the lobby lights. He moved through the space with that peculiar quality that always surrounded him, not hurrying but covering ground faster than seemed physically possible, his awareness extending outward like radar picking up threats before they materialized. That's when he encountered them. The security team stood in a loose formation near the elevator bank, 6 men wearing matching black suits with earpieces and that particular facial expression security professionals develop, the one that says they've seen violence and aren't impressed by reputation. They were protecting someone important. I never learned who, some mainland executive or government official whose name mattered more than his character. The team leader was a thick-necked Cantonese man in his mid-40s who stood 6 feet 2 inches and carried his weight like an offensive weapon. Beside him were 2 younger operatives with military bearing, a stocky Malaysian who kept his hands loose at his sides, and 2 more positioned at angles that suggested coordinated tactical training. They didn't recognize him immediately, or perhaps they did, and that was the point. Because when Bruce approached the elevator, intending to head up to Chow's suite on the 12th floor, the team leader stepped forward with his hand raised in that universal gesture of authority that says, "You will stop because I have decided you will stop." "The elevators are temporarily restricted," the team leader said in Cantonese, his tone carrying just enough condescension to make clear this wasn't a request. "We're securing the floor for a VIP arrival. You'll need to wait in the bar until we've completed our protocol." Bruce stopped. He didn't plant his feet or shift his stance. He simply became still in a way that made the air around him feel heavier. "I have a meeting," he said quietly, his Cantonese carrying that slight American accent that marked him as foreign despite his Chinese heritage. "It's on the 12th floor. I'll take the service elevator." The team leader's expression hardened. This was the moment when ego entered the equation, when professional protocol became personal territory. "All elevators," he repeated, and now there was an edge in his voice, a deliberate sharpening. "We protect our clients against exactly your type. Famous faces who think normal rules don't apply because people recognize them from movie screens." The lobby had gone quiet. Hotel guests at the reception desk had stopped mid-conversation. A cleaning woman with a vacuum cleaner had paused near a potted palm. The concierge behind his marble counter had picked up a telephone but wasn't dialing, just holding it like a prop in a scene he couldn't believe was unfolding. Bruce's eyes, which had been taking in the entire scene, with that preternatural awareness he'd cultivated through years of meditation and combat training, focused entirely on the team leader. When he spoke, his voice hadn't risen in volume. If anything, it had gotten quieter, which somehow made it more penetrating. "Your type," Bruce repeated, and there was something in those two words that made every martial artist in that lobby stand a little straighter, made the hair on the back of my neck rise with the electricity of recognition. "What exactly is my type?" The Malaysian operative had shifted his weight slightly, preparing for potential escalation. The two younger security men had widened their stance by perhaps 3 inches. The team leader, who should have recognized these as warning signs that he'd crossed from professional detention into personal confrontation, instead took another step forward, closing the distance to less than 4 feet. The type who got famous kicking air in front of cameras and now thinks he knows something about real protection work, the team leader said, and I watched his right hand drift toward his hip, not quite touching the extendable baton I could see outlined under his jacket, but sending a message. "We're trained professionals, military background, police experience, actual combat against opponents who fight back instead of choreographed sequences where everyone knows who wins before the cameras roll." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds, but I learned that night how time bends around certain moments, how 4 seconds can contain entire universes of decision and consequence. I watched Bruce's face, expecting anger, expecting the legendary volatility that rumors claimed lived beneath his controlled exterior. Instead, I saw something that terrified me more than rage ever could. I saw absolutely perfect calm. "I understand," Bruce said, and his hands, which had been hanging loose at his sides, rose slowly until they were positioned at his center line, not in fists, not in any recognizable guard position, just present, available, ready to become whatever they needed to become. "You believe movie fighting isn't real fighting. You believe your training makes you qualified to assess mine. You believe that because I've chosen to share what I know through film rather than prove it in streets or back alley grudge matches, this means I'm somehow less than legitimate." The team leader's jaw tightened. "I believe," he said, his voice rising now, "that there's a difference between movie stars and men who've actually put their lives on the line protecting others. And I believe that famous people need to learn that their fame doesn't intimidate everyone." Bruce nodded slowly, as if considering a philosophical proposition in a university seminar, rather than standing in a hotel lobby facing 6 men who clearly intended to make him back down through intimidation or force. "Then perhaps," he said, "we should establish which belief system more accurately reflects reality. What I'm about to describe happened in less than 3 minutes of real time. But to understand what occurred, you need to understand that Bruce Lee didn't fight the way normal human beings fight. He'd spent years studying fencing, boxing, Wing Chun, wrestling, and dozens of other systems, not to collect techniques like trophies, but to strip away everything that didn't work under the unforgiving pressure of actual combat. He called his approach Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. And it wasn't a martial art. It was a philosophy of combat that treated fighting the way water treats obstacles, flowing around rigidity, filling empty spaces, becoming whatever was necessary to overcome resistance. The team leader made his move first. He was professional enough to know you didn't telegraph attacks with obvious preparation. His right hand snapped toward Bruce's collar in a grip designed to control and manipulate, a security technique taught in every professional protection course, meant to seize control of an opponent's upper body and create leverage for restraint or takedown. Bruce's response existed in that space between thought and action, where trained reflexes operate faster than conscious decision. His left hand rose in a perfect arc, not blocking the incoming grab, but intercepting it 3 inches before it could reach his collar, catching the team leader's wrist with thumb and fingers positioned over pressure points that modern sports medicine wouldn't properly document for another 15 years. His right hand simultaneously drove forward in a straight-line punch that stopped exactly 1/4 of an inch from the team leader's throat, close enough that the displacement of air brushed against windpipe, close enough that the team leader's eyes went wide with the sudden understanding that death had just passed within millimeters of his anatomy. But Bruce didn't strike. The punch hovered there, vibrating with restrained force, demonstrating capacity without deployment, showing the team leader precisely how close he was to consequences he wasn't prepared to face. Then it withdrew, flowing back to guard position like water returning to its source. The entire exchange had taken perhaps 0.8 of a second. The Malaysian operative moved next, coming from Bruce's left side with a low grab aimed at his legs, attempting a wrestling takedown that would bring the confrontation to the ground, where size and weight supposedly provided advantage. Bruce's awareness, which I would later learn he'd cultivated through meditation exercises that heightened proprioception and spatial cognition, had already mapped the Malaysian's position and intention before the movement began. He pivoted on his right foot, his left leg rising in a checking motion that simultaneously blocked the takedown attempt and positioned his shin bone against the Malaysian's shoulder with enough pressure to halt forward momentum completely. Again, Bruce could have struck. The Malaysian's head was exposed, vulnerable to a knee strike or elbow that would have ended his participation in the confrontation immediately. Again, Bruce chose restraint. He let the man feel the pressure, understand the position, recognize the vulnerability, then disengaged and reset to neutral stance. The two younger security operatives came together, coordinated, using tactical training that suggested law enforcement or military background. They approached from angles designed to split defensive attention, one high targeting the upper body, one low aiming for legs and center mass. This was professional work, the kind of synchronized assault that overcomes individual opponents through geometric advantage and coordinated pressure. Bruce moved through their attack like smoke through chicken wire. His body lowered perhaps 4 inches as the high attack passed through space he'd occupied half a heartbeat earlier. His right leg snapped out in a stop kick that caught the low attacker directly in the solar plexus with precisely calibrated force, enough to halt momentum and disrupt breathing, but not enough to break ribs or cause injury, requiring medical intervention. The high attacker, committed to his trajectory and finding empty air where his target should have been, stumbled past Bruce's right shoulder, completely off balance. Bruce could have dropped him there. Could have used the man's momentum against him, applied joint locks or strikes to vulnerable points now fully exposed. Instead, he placed one hand on the man's shoulder, steadied him, prevented the fall that would have sent him crashing into the marble floor, hard enough to split skin and crack bone. The team leader, recovering from his shock, pulled the extendable baton from his belt and flicked it open with a metallic snap that echoed through the silent lobby like a gunshot. 21 inches of hardened steel, weighted for maximum impact, capable of breaking bones and causing trauma that required hospitalization. He held it in a reverse grip, professional technique, prepared to use it not as a club, but as a precision instrument for inflicting controlled damage. "Enough games," he said, breathing hard now, professional composure cracking to reveal the anger underneath. "You want to prove something? Let's prove something." Bruce's expression hadn't changed. If anything, his face had become more serene, more present, as if the escalation of violence had brought him to a place where his training operated at peak efficiency. He didn't raise his hands in defensive guard. He didn't shift his stance to prepare for the baton's reach advantage. He simply stood there, weight distributed evenly, breathing steady and deep, watching the team leader with eyes that seemed to see not just the man's body, but his intention, his fear, his ego-driven need to dominate this confrontation. The team leader swung the baton in a lateral strike aimed at Bruce's ribcage, professional technique again, targeting the body rather than the head, because security training emphasizes control over lethality. The baton moved fast, faster than most untrained eyes could track, steel blurring through air with enough force to break ribs, collapse lungs, end fights decisively. Bruce's right hand rose and caught the baton mid-swing, not blocking it, not deflecting it, catching it. His fingers closed around the steel shaft and stopped its momentum completely, absorbing the kinetic energy through perfect structure and timing that transformed force into stillness. For perhaps 2 seconds, they stood frozen in that position, the team leader straining to pull the baton back or push it forward, Bruce holding it motionless with what looked like no effort at all. Then Bruce spoke, and his voice carried through the silent lobby with absolute clarity. "This baton is a tool," he said. "Tools aren't dangerous. Intentions are dangerous. Right now, your intention is to hurt me because I've embarrassed you in front of your team and hotel guests. You believe that hurting me will restore your authority and prove that your training is legitimate. But what you haven't understood is that I've already proved something more important than who can strike whom." He released the baton and stepped back, hands returning to that neutral position, open, available, non-threatening. "I've proved that I could have hurt all of you at any point in this confrontation, and I chose not to. That choice wasn't weakness. It wasn't mercy in the sense you probably understand mercy. It was recognition that true martial skill isn't about who can cause more damage. It's about who can end conflict with minimum necessary force, who can protect themselves without destroying others, who can demonstrate capacity without deploying it. The team leader stood there, baton hanging loose in his hand, chest heaving with exertion and emotion, face flushed with the kind of shame that comes from being exposed in front of peers. The other 5 security operatives had frozen in positions of uncertainty, their tactical training providing no protocols for this situation, no clear path forward when overwhelming force had been met with something they didn't have names for. Bruce turned slowly, meeting each man's eyes in sequence. "Every single one of you has training that's valuable," he said. "Military experience, police work, protection protocols, these things matter. They keep people safe. They represent real skill, developed through real effort. But they've also taught you to see the world in terms of dominance and submission, threats and neutralization. You've learned to assess danger and respond with calibrated violence, which is exactly what your profession requires." He paused, and in that pause, I saw something extraordinary happen. I saw his face soften, saw vulnerability enter his expression, saw him allow these men who just tried to intimidate and assault him to witness his humanity rather than just his capability. "What you haven't learned," he continued, "is that there's a level of skill beyond what you've been taught, a way of moving through conflict that doesn't require you to prove your dominance or protect your ego. It requires you to see clearly what's actually happening, to respond to reality rather than your assumptions about reality, to be so confident in your training that you don't need to demonstrate it except when absolutely necessary." The team leader's hand opened, and the baton clattered onto the marble floor with a sound like a sword being sheathed after battle. His shoulders, which had been drawn up in defensive tension, slowly lowered. When he spoke, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of the aggressive authority he'd wielded just minutes earlier. "You could have seriously hurt us," he said. It wasn't a question. Bruce nodded. "Yes, any of you, all of you. In the first 3 seconds of this confrontation, I identified at least 17 opportunities to cause significant injury using standard striking techniques, 12 opportunities for joint manipulation that would have required medical intervention, and 6 positions where I could have induced unconsciousness through blood choke or nerve disruption." He paused, letting them absorb this information. "I chose none of those options because hurting you would have proved only that I'm capable of hurting you. It wouldn't have taught you anything. It wouldn't have made me safer. It would have simply added violence to a situation where violence wasn't necessary." The stocky operative who hadn't yet engaged spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "What did you want to prove then? What was the point of all this, if not to show you're better trained?" Bruce's expression shifted again, and I saw in his eyes something I've spent 52 years trying to understand, a quality of presence that seemed to exist outside normal time, as if he was simultaneously fully engaged in this moment and viewing it from some vast distance where all its meanings were already clear. "I wanted to prove," he said slowly, "that being formless is stronger than having the perfect form, that being present is more powerful than being fast, that restraint is the ultimate demonstration of skill. That truth about yourself, about your capabilities, about what's actually necessary in any given moment is more valuable than any traditional teaching that tells you there's one right way to move, one right technique to apply, one right response to conflict." He looked directly at the team leader. "You said you protect your clients against people like me, against famous faces who think rules don't apply, but you didn't protect anyone tonight. You escalated a simple request for elevator access into a confrontation that could have ended with your team in a hospital and me in police custody, and for what? To defend territory that wasn't actually threatened? To prove dominance over someone who didn't challenge your authority until you made it a challenge?" The team leader's face had changed completely. The hardness was gone, replaced by something raw and honest that looked like understanding, or the beginning of understanding. "I made assumptions," he said quietly, "about who you were, what you represented, what your skill level actually was versus what I believed it was, based on seeing you in films." "Yes," Bruce said simply, "and those assumptions almost cost all of us something valuable. Not just physical safety, though that mattered, but the opportunity to see each other clearly, to recognize that skill exists in many forms, to understand that the way we've been trained to handle conflict isn't always the most effective way to resolve it." I watched something extraordinary happen in that lobby. The 6 security operatives, who minutes earlier had positioned themselves as adversaries defending territory and professional pride, slowly formed a semicircle around Bruce, their body language shifting from defensive vigilance to something closer to students approaching a teacher. The team leader stepped forward, no longer attempting to control or dominate the space, and extended his hand. Bruce took it, not in the aggressive grip that men use to demonstrate strength, but in the way old friends clasp hands, with genuine respect and recognition of shared experience. "Could you show us?" the team leader asked. "Not now, not here, but sometime. Could you show us how you do what you do, how you see what you see, how you stay that calm when people are trying to hurt you?" Bruce was quiet for several seconds, and I could see him weighing something internal, some calculation about time and commitment and what he owed to the world versus what the world constantly demanded from him. Finally, he nodded. "My school in Kowloon is open on Tuesday and Thursday evenings," he said. 7 p.m. If you come ready to question everything you think you know about fighting. Come ready to lose your certainty. Come ready to become formless." The team leader bowed slightly, not the deep theatrical bow of martial arts films, but the simple gesture of respect between equals. "We'll be there," he said. Bruce nodded, then turned toward the elevator bank. The security team parted without being asked, creating a clear path. He pressed the button for the 12th floor, and as the doors slid open, he paused and looked back at all of us. The security team, the hotel staff who'd witnessed everything, the guests who'd stopped their journeys through the lobby to watch this strange ballet of violence that never quite became violence. "The opponent is not the enemy," he said, and his voice carried that quality of teaching, of distilling complex philosophy into simple truth. "The opponent is the mirror that shows you what you still need to learn. Tonight, these men were my teachers. They showed me I still carry ego about being underestimated. They showed me I still feel the need to prove capability even when proof isn't necessary. They showed me that restraint is easy when facing weak opponents, but much harder when facing skilled ones who question your legitimacy." The elevator doors began to close, and in the narrowing space between them, I saw Bruce smile, a genuine expression of warmth and recognition that transformed his face from the intense mask I'd seen on movie posters into something fully human, fully present, fully alive to the moment's possibilities. The doors closed, the elevator ascended, and the lobby remained silent for perhaps 20 more seconds, everyone processing what they'd witnessed, trying to reconcile movie star legend with the human being who just demonstrated that real power has nothing to do with domination and everything to do with choice. I stood there in that marble lobby with its fractured crystal light and realized I'd just witnessed something that transcended martial arts, transcended combat technique, transcended the category of fight altogether. I'd witnessed philosophy made physical, theory transformed into practice. The gap between what we say we believe and how we actually move through conflict collapsed into perfect coherence. The security team remained in their semicircle for several minutes, talking quietly among themselves, their earlier aggression completely dissolved. I heard fragments of their conversation, discussions of positioning, recognition of their vulnerabilities, amazement at Bruce's restraint, questions about training methods, and philosophical foundations. The team leader kept looking at his hands, opening and closing them, as if trying to understand how they'd been so easily controlled by someone 40 pounds lighter, with reach disadvantage and no weapon. I learned later that all 6 men showed up at Bruce's Kowloon school the following Tuesday. I learned they trained there regularly for the next 18 months, until Bruce's death in July 1973 ended those sessions and scattered students around the world, each carrying fragments of knowledge that would never be fully assembled into complete system. I learned that the team leader eventually left security work and opened his own school, teaching what he called awareness-based protection, emphasizing de-escalation and restraint as primary defensive tools. But what I learned that night, standing in that lobby watching the aftermath of confrontation, was something simpler and more profound. I learned that the stories we tell about violence, the myths we construct about combat and dominance, and what makes someone truly dangerous, are almost always wrong. We celebrate the knockout punch, the dramatic victory, the moment when one person's skill definitively overcomes another's resistance. We build entire entertainment industries around the spectacle of superior force meeting inferior defense. What we don't celebrate What we barely even recognize is the moment when someone with overwhelming capability chooses not to deploy it. The moment when restraint becomes the ultimate demonstration of skill. The moment when someone shows you exactly how vulnerable you are and then steps back, allowing you to see your vulnerability without experiencing its full consequences. Bruce Lee died 16 months after that night in the Mandarin Oriental Hotel lobby. Cerebral edema, they said, brain swelling of unknown origin. 32 years old, at the absolute peak of his physical capacity and creative output, gone in the space between one breath and the next. The world mourned the loss of the movie star, the martial arts icon, the cultural bridge between East and West. But I mourned the loss of something else. I mourned the loss of a teacher who understood that true martial skill wasn't about perfecting techniques, but about perfecting yourself. That combat wasn't about defeating opponents, but about transcending the need for opponents. That strength wasn't the capacity to cause harm, but the wisdom to know when harm isn't necessary. I'm 73 years old now. I've seen the martial arts world evolve, seen mixed martial arts competitions turn combat into science, seen YouTube and social media democratize fight footage, seen the rise of evidence-based training that separates what actually works from what merely looks impressive. The modern approach emphasizes reality, pressure testing, full resistance sparring against opponents who genuinely want to defeat you. And all of it misses what I learned that night in March 1972, because Bruce Lee's greatest technique wasn't the 1-inch punch or the side kick that could knock a man backwards 6 feet. It wasn't his speed or his conditioning or his revolutionary training methods.